Welcome to my podcast, and today I'm sitting in the castle with one of my most special guests. It's my husband, Geordie, and I thought we'd just sit down and, in all seriousness, with a reflective hat on, think about the legacy of a most remarkable woman, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who so sadly died last month. What is most remarkable for me is that she was, of course, my husband's godmother. And unlike other people and families, he was lucky enough to know her throughout much of his life. Welcome, Geordie. And I thought people might enjoy your reflections a little bit about this remarkable woman. I know you've shared them in the Mail and some other newspapers. And of course, her passion and knowledge of horses was something she shared so much with your beloved father.
Yes, Ferdinand, yeah, that's absolutely true. Of course, well, I don't think I have any memory of it, but probably my first meeting of the Queen when I was only a baby, because she came to my christening. I had the honour of Her Majesty coming to my christening in Highclere Church, and that fact was one of the photos that we found the other day, wasn't it? It was
it's
rather
beautiful.
Amazingly sharp black and white photo with my father, my grandfather, Her Majesty. Yes, well, I think rather extraordinary, to be honest.
And you're this adorable little baby.
Yes, well, that was there in 1956, so a long way back. With everyone obviously looking very much younger then, but no, over the years, there were sort of points or milestones in the year when Her Majesty would come down to Milford Lake, where I was growing up with my parents, and visit us, and she'd come to see her horses, mares and foals, talk to my father about her thoroughbred operation. And they may be the horses that were up at Highclere Stud, here at Highclere, or just across the way at her stud at Pearlhampton at Kingsclere. And of course, she also had horses in training with Andrew Balding's father, Ian, in those days. So there was quite a horse connection in this area. And I mean, I was quite a small boy, but I remember probably at a tea party or tea at Milford Lake House when I first met Her Majesty, in terms of remembering who she was. Maybe would think I would have done any better than what did our Edward's little friend say when he first met the Queen?
Oh, that was so funny. Yes, I know. Well, at a similar age, our son Edward also was introduced to the Queen, and we were all standing out in the fields together. He had his friend Vivi, who's one of my girlfriend's daughters, Viviana. And Vivi turned to me and said, Fiona, I thought you said the Queen was going to be here. And Her Majesty was standing, sort of 10 yards away, looked round. And I said, Vivi, darling, she's just over there. And Vivi said, but she's not wearing a crown. And the Queen, I think, was very kind. She replied saying she didn't always wear a crown outside, because she was wearing a headscarf that day to keep the wind out.
No, but in a way, that tells a wonderful story of how Her Majesty was such an amazing person with young people. She was always brilliant with children, always asking, as you got older, asking the relevant things of what you were doing in your life, where your friends were, where were you heading next, interested in schools and topical subjects. And also, obviously, Prince Philip was as well. They were both two incredibly stimulating people to get around. But you always wanted to be well on your toes and not saying something you hadn't really researched properly, because the throwaway line that wasn't at all remotely correct would be picked up by Her Majesty or Prince Philip, and you might be told about it. But that's fair enough for young people. But I think they were very supportive, really. But no, and then I was lucky enough over the years to be invited to the Queen's homes at Windsor, Sandringham and Balmoral in Scotland. And in fact, the other day, we were just looking at great pictures of family life up in Scotland. In fact, that was before I was born, when my parents were visiting Balmoral in the summer. And there was Princess Anne and Prince Charles, wasn't there? They were as children out having picnics, as an amazing time, as you do out on the hill in Scotland. And they were great occasions over the years, or when we went to Royal Ascot, even went in the carriage following Her Majesty down the track for one of Royal Ascot days. They all have the colour and pageantry about them, and they're just things you don't ever forget. I mean, I was really honoured to be asked to be one of the pages of honour from between when I was about 12 and 14 or 15. And I remember the first time, and when I was holding the Queen's enormous train with all
so
the
this was at the Palace of Westminster.
The Palace of Westminster, yes.
It was
Opening of Parliament. It was the first opening of Parliament, I think in 1970, that was in colour TV. And you can go on the web and you can find a very short clip that goes round and round of me with the other pages of the time. It was David Ogilvy, Geordie Gregg's brother, the other, Louis, and I can't remember the other. We were following behind the Queen. It's all in colour and it's all clear. I remember being a thoroughly terrifying Duke of Norfolk, the Earl Marshal, as it was there. Must be the current Duke's uncle, I think, who was a little bit terrifying to small boys. And no one had told me that as you come into the House of Lords, all these trumpets would go off. So I think I was seen to be sort of jump about a few inches into the air when that happened.
Did you drop the train?
Well, no. I think I did something a bit odd. Anyway, there was that. There was the Garter ceremony and other things, and it was great to have all this incredible clothing you had to wear suddenly just for a short time and then give back again, covered in brocade and gold and a sword and all this stuff. It was all.
Were they real swords, Geordie?
Yes. Well, that was another thing. I think there probably might have been something that would never be allowed nowadays. That I had a sort of vague sort of sword fight with one of the pages while waiting to do something. That might have done us in, but. Anyway, I think it was an education to be around the Queen, both in very formal constitutional state occasions and then in a very much more relaxed mode when Her Majesty was in the countryside doing what she loved with horses or her dogs, or coming out here with game shooting when she would use the dogs to pick up birds. And she was an enormous supporter of farming and the countryside and conservation, as of course Prince Philip and now King Charles today. And these are really important things for people who are working on the land, to have that much support from the monarch of the time. And she, in terms of animals, she just really had this affinity with both dogs and horses, and really understood the horse and the breeding of the thoroughbreds, and had an encyclopedic knowledge about it. You could ever catch Her Majesty out on knowing something about racing and who won which race in what year and who the parents were of the horse. Quite amazing, to be honest.
Geordie, I know your father met the Queen, Princess Elizabeth as she was, when they were both youngsters and probably at tea parties again, back to afternoon tea. But and then, of course, he was one of the young men, all of whom were in uniform with Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, when they ran round the streets of London in 1945 celebrating VE Day. But, of course, it was a little bit later that, in a sense, the friendship over the breeding and training of racehorses developed. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, I mean, my father would have originally met Her Majesty as both going to tea parties, but probably around about 1930, 1931 or two or so, and then as Fiona mentions, there was the famous evening in May 1945, VE Day, when in a version of sort of mufti and uniforms and scarves and the rest of it, they all charged around the streets of London just after Churchill and the Queen's father, George VI, had been on the Buckingham Palace balcony. Can you imagine? It must have been the most amazing feeling with all the crowds and all the joyous rejoicing at the end of this appalling war. But then later on, as they were friends and very much fascinated by the whole progress of the thoroughbred horse and how the breeding and racing was going to be improved, they both shared the same passion for that. And in the late 60s, 70s, my father became Her Majesty's racing manager. So he was advising her on the whole breeding operations, from which mares to keep or to move on, which stallions to make them the mares with, horses going to which trainers, because she had Ian Balding and then Dick Hearn as well, and then Richard Hannon, and then Richard Hannon, and William Hastings passed for a while before he decided not to continue. So my father really, besides everything else he was doing, he devoted quite a bit of time to helping Her Majesty really bring on her whole breeding operation. And of course, there were new views on bringing in separate bloodlines from this country, from abroad, from America, and finding the best mares. And applying the best veterinary science to everything. And my father was very much involved in that, because he was part of bodies in Newmarket linked to vets and improving the different science and different aspects of horses and breeding.
And then actually, didn't he introduce some new pattern races as well?
Well, one of the jobs he did, after the war was to help develop the whole European system of group races for better horses, the Group 1, 2, 3 races that horses from all these countries could run in. And so I think that was a part of rebuilding that element of life on the continent after the terrible war, bringing people together again. And the Queen was very much supportive of that role. And in fact, probably the cherry on the cake in that area for her was when Highclere won the Prix de Diane, which is the French Oaks, at Chantilly. The crowd evidently went as wild as they had ever been for any winner. They were so pleased that La Reine won the
And she spoke fantastic French as well, didn't she?
She spoke perfect French. So that was a very joyous occasion on that day.
But she loved, I think, from what I gathered, which is obviously a much shorter acquaintanceship, which I've been lucky enough to have with Her Majesty. She loved the process by watching a foal being born, the mating plans and the foal being born and the growth and the enjoyment of the foal, bringing the foal into the world, and then your hopes with it. So it wasn't just the horses on the track, it was the whole development, unless I'm mistaken, from when you first...
It was the whole development in a sort of micro way, which I know we try and do today here at Highclere.
Which I love.
You do perhaps get a bit over attached to them as pets before they may even become a racehorse, or even when they are, because you remember the process right from the beginning. But it's all surrounding the attachment to the land and the grass and the crops that grow around it, because neither us nor the horses can survive without farming, and everything is entwined and linked together. And I know that both Her Majesty and, of course, Prince Philip, they love the wild element of the land up at Balmoral, on the moors, the hills, the lochs. And it was always great to be out on one of those picnics because, of course, the Queen and Prince Philip were fantastic barbecue picnic organisers, chefs and everything else. And they're very, very good at it. So I think Prince Philip could have, maybe he did write a book on how to do barbecue picnics, and I'm not sure about that, but he certainly qualified as a top chef in it. And Her Majesty would qualify as the most amazing organiser of the site, the layout, everything there, how it was all going to be put, and everyone was going to have a good time. So those were all amazing occasions, really.
I think the photographs that I've found, what I love is it's that moment in time, the fleeting expression on someone's face, which isn't posed for a photograph. It's just that moment in time of being out in the countryside, which are incredibly special to have here in the archives here as a memory of this amazing lady who sadly passed, and also of your parents, Geordie. You know, I remember when I was first met the Queen here, and you had just said to me at sort of tea time, by the way, we're going up to supper with your parents, and the Queen will be there. So I didn't have much time to think about anything, which is always good, as usual here, in at the deep end. And we had such a wonderful dinner, just the five of us together, which I will never forget as some of the honours that I have been lucky enough to be part of. So there's also all the bloopers I've made, like the horses. Do you remember that at Windsor?
When you gave the carrot, we were lucky enough to have gone riding with Her Majesty, and then there was carrots laid on to give the ponies or horse at the end, and you gave it to the wrong one.
Well, there were 4 black hindquarters facing me, and I thought, oh my goodness. So actually, I decided to go in a slight panic stations between 2 of them. On that way, I kind of cut down my risk of being entirely wrong. So I had narrowed it down to 50%, which was right. But then on the other hand, I gave the carrot to your horse, and the Queen immediately set me straight. But it was honestly such an honour. And I remember riding around thinking, you must stay in control and mustn't overtake the Queen. But I'm sure she's a far, far better rider than I in any case. But it was a huge honour.
Years ago, I was lucky enough to ride the wonderful ceremonial horse that had been lent to President Reagan.
Wow!
A statement earlier on, but of course they're great, gloriously big horses, but they're very well trained. But it's just an honour to be with Her Majesty around the edges of the river at Windsor and the castle. You just have those memories and you don't forget them. I think the other thing to say about the Queen was that more sort of ceremonial things where there was a lot of people at a reception or that kind of thing. she was always brilliant about gathering people in and asking them to join in and talk and come and be part of things. It was never wanted to get someone feel someone was left out in any way, and that applied to all ages. So she was really very good at getting people into a conversation and a feeling that they were really part of the event that was happening always.
And we were obviously met her when she came, sadly, and in some ways it was a great honour for her to come to your ma's funeral, and she was so switched on and so full of conversation that never missed the trick. Even as she was slightly older, I hope I keep half her mind as I grow older. She was completely on the ball. And then, of course, you fortunately could see her briefly at the Chelsea Flower Show.
Well, that was the last time I said very few words to the Queen, because she was going around Chelsea this year back in May, normal time. In
2 or 3 months before she sadly
in a
died.
golf buggy. We were looking at a couple of roses we were showing for the Highclere roses for future sales at Highclere. And she waved very kindly, just said a few things, and then passed on. But I mean, the great thing about Her Majesty was that she just remembers and says hello, you know. And last year, we sponsored a race at Salisbury, and her filly won it.
Yes, it was great. We sponsored it with Highclere Castle Gin.
Well, that was an excitement, and I sent her a bottle. I got a charming letter back not long afterwards saying how much she'd enjoyed that and how exciting it was for the new filly to have won the race, and wishing us luck with everything. And I thought, you know, for someone, I mean, she was 95 then, and everything written as if it was someone who was 25. So I mean, it was incredible, really.
It is extraordinary. And then I've been lucky enough to stay with you at Sandringham a couple of times, and I do remember again the fact that although it was January, we'd always go out to one of the lodges to have a kind of picnic, half in and half out, a barbecue in the evening cooked by Prince Philip, and then driving back at breakneck speed, being driven back by the Queen at some speed through the lanes. Geordie, you must have been driven by her quite a few times, I'd imagine.
I think she just knew all the areas around her own estate so well that she was she was quite a competent and reasonably fast driver. But of course, if we forget that, though it's been discussed recently, that was one of her first ever jobs of learning what to do was in car mechanics during the war. So I expect she knows much more about the innards of the engine and the drive shaft of a Land Rover than I do. So.
I think your father also learnt how to be a car fitter, wasn't he?
He did a bit of that as well, because it was part of being able to make sure your armoured cars kept working as in the Blues and Royals in the war. So, but I think between them they could have probably got things going. There was occasion once on some steep hill in Balmoral where one of the shafts of the Land Rovers went. They knew what to do, but I think we all had to abandon that one and walk home because you couldn't really fix it on a steep gradient. Anyway.
But I'm not sure that would have worried them either, actually. You've been a good walk in time for tea.
Good walk in time for tea, and if you're on the moor and high up in Scotland, the way back down is to follow the river.
Oh, right. And of course, tea, whenever you were lucky enough to be asked to stay, was quite a great occasion, wasn't it?
I think it was one of Her Majesty's meals she enjoyed the most because she just loved all the layout of all the different things in it. Even though the Queen would never been a one to overindulge in any way, because she always had the most perfect figure for all her life. But she just loved the idea of everyone sitting round that time of day, enjoying an old-fashioned English afternoon tea, which for most of us would have been a rarity. And it was just a special occasion, really.
There was such a choice of different delicious tidbits to eat, too. So it was completely scrummy. And also it was less formal seating, wasn't it?
Yes, it was not quite the same as a dinner or the lunch. But again, it was part of bringing people together. Mm. And some of them might not have been around earlier, and then you were meeting someone new. And I think all the Queen's life and all her proper ceremonial role as a constitutional monarch, she was just very good at engaging in conversation and communication with people and bringing people together who may or not necessarily have always been keen to communicate and talk, but they did with the Queen. So that's fantastic for building diplomatic relations, building communication around the world. I mean, she was our Queen, but in many ways she did amazing jobs for all the people of the world. And she knew, I think is it 13 or 14 American presidents? I never quite know what the right. It's one of those figures. I mean, we remember we were looking at that extraordinary photograph. What was it, 1952?
When, yes, President
Eisenhower came to
Balmoral.
stay at Balmoral, and my father must have been, my parents, well, it wouldn't have been my mum then, but she didn't even know my father then. So my father must have taken it.
Well, there's some extraordinary photographs. Perhaps it was he had a new camera or something, he was trying it out, but they are wonderful to have, really, really special. I was also thinking that, Geordie, obviously you're now taking out more time to enjoy the breeding of your horses, and one of your mares is in Folter's Study of Man, isn't that right?
Yes, a Study of Man father is Deep Impact, a very important stallion. That actually went to Japan as a stallion, and was very successful. But the key thing about him is that he goes back to Highclere, the mare here, that my father helped Her Majesty breed, one of the Queen's best ever horses. And Highclere's father was Queen Cesar, who was my grandfather's stallion.
So that was wonderful, but Highclere was actually owned by the Queen, wasn't it?
Yes, Highclere was owned by the Queen, and then there was another one called Burkclere, and it goes all the way down the line to Deep Impact, and then this Study of Man, who was a very big success in France. And I have this very large filly who maybe will be a success too, but at the moment she's just gambling happily in the field.
Yes, she's rather lovely. I mean, we nicknamed her was that Valentina? I've forgotten her name now. So, yes. She's got a real name. What was her real name? Can you remember that?
Kaya.
Kaya.
A goddess.
A goddess, okay.
Yes.
Well, goddess is always useful. But I hope she will run quite fast. But she looks absolutely lovely. She's quite determined already, isn't she?
Well, she's bigger than her two friends. So she pushes them around a bit. But they all have very individual characters, as we all do. And when you're around them and handling them and feeding them, looking after them, you get to know them. And I think that was all that kind of aspect of working with horses that the Queen enjoyed so much, really.
It was. And then just turning briefly to the dogs, because obviously I grew up with a little spaniel, Dottie Lottie or Lottie, and I knew that you had known a lovely spaniel called Mango, which was
the
Queen from the Queen.
Had a wonderful keeper and breeder of working retrieving dogs, Mr. Meldrum, and he from his bitches produced this wonderful dog called Sandringham Mango, and Mango was a wonderful Cocker Spaniel who was trained to the degree he was practically a circus dog in terms of how you could control him. And my father thought he was absolutely amazing. He basically was my father's dog for some years here.
And thus, that was why that, given our not so well trained spaniel Lottie and Mango, is why I decided to acquire Rosie from our own keeper Eddie. And Rosie, the Cocker Spaniel, arrived as a Christmas present for you and Eddie on Christmas Day many years ago. But in a sense, to keep the enthusiasm of the spaniels within our own home, because every day with a spaniel is such a new and exciting day, and they're such optimistic dogs, aren't they?
They are. They're always charging about looking for the next exciting thing, whether they're any good at retrieving or not. They're certainly characters who want to have a great time every day.
Yes, and I think by that you're telling me that, quite rightly, none of our spaniels retrieve to any extent like Mango, and probably are slightly naughtier like Lottie, although they do mostly come back when they're called. And rather than sleeping outside, they prefer to sleep in our bedroom. But never mind. If Evie's not in our bedroom, she makes quite a scene about it. So she is a bit of a Princess Evie, actually. I thank you, Geordie, for reminiscing. And I just thought it's a wonderful way of recording the stories and the memories that you have of an extraordinary childhood with one of the most extraordinary ladies, women, leaders who we will ever have known, and for whom we have all known throughout all of our lives, because very few people would necessarily today remember her father, King George VI, as well. And I think we can just say long live the new King, Charles III. And I'm sure he's very well aware and will take up his mother's mantle in the countryside as well as with his other thoughts and leadership.
Yes, well, Prince Charles, now King Charles, has been an incredibly strong supporter of preserving the environment and traditional ways of life in the countryside. And I'm sure as King will continue that support. He may not be able to spend as much time on all the things he was involved in because it's different role as King rather than the Prince of Wales, but I'm sure Prince William will take up many of those himself. And so I'm sure that the wish to help conserve the environment, the countryside for all our futures will be part of both generations of the royal family.
Well, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for sitting with me here today, and I hope everyone listening has enjoyed this podcast. Thank you.